Feedback's really important for students to develop their work. And I think we give feedback in two different ways. Sometimes very formal feedback, so we're writing on their work and we're assessing their work. And sometimes quite informal feedback, which might take place if you're working in a lab together and you comment on an experiment that's just happened, or if you're in the field together or you're asking questions together. So how we word the feedback will affect fundamentally how much learning students can take from it. I think of feedback as taking place in a dialogue between the student, their work, and us as the supervisor, and also what's expected in the field as good practice, the kind of way of writing, the way of constructing and expressing your thoughts and your findings and your developing argument. But sometimes feedback tends to seem a little bit curt to students. So it's a dialogue that enables learning, but depends quite a lot on the language that we use. There's many examples on the website in this section. There's some research has been carried out by Vijay Kumar and Alika Strack on the language of feedback, and there's also other examples about different sorts of staged feedback in Rowena Murray's work. So I'd like us to consider actually what are we trying to do when we give students feedback. If we're writing or speaking to them about the work that they've done, sometimes we need to correct mistakes. And so we'll say, this result doesn't seem to have worked for you, try doing this. Or that date's wrong, it should be 1846. That informational correction feedback helps them obviously get things right and realise that the quality of the research and the scholarliness is very important, making sure you've got your facts right. But feedback doesn't stop at that. It is actually an ongoing dialogue about encouraging learning, and to get the students engaged in that active learning rather than just feeling as though we're always assessing them and labelling them and pointing out what's wrong. It's important, I think, to get involved in something that's called feed forward. That involves making suggestions for students about what they might do next in order to improve their work. So it kind of changes the language that we use when we give feedback. So we might produce something that's a bit more like what's called also a feedback sandwich, where you say things like, this is very interesting, or well done, or you've written a lot, or that's probably the most basic thing you might be able to say. Then you point out some of the things that need developing, either correcting of information, or enhancing of the expression, or making suggestions about working at a more conceptual level, but you'd never say that. What you'd do is you'd talk about ways of using the theories or interrogating the concepts, and you'd probably provide models. So it becomes more of a discussion. So the bit in the middle is correcting the facts or providing an informed discussion and maybe some models for students to see how they can engage at a more conceptual level, how they can theorise their work, how they might argue or link their evidence to their argument in a more readable fashion and a more credible fashion. So we're not just telling them to do it, we're showing them how to do it. Now that's the centre. And the final bit of the feedback sandwich is the feed forward, where you're saying, I now suggest that you take this off into section 8, or rewrite those paragraphs, or go back to that experiment and explore whether you had the variables right or the conditions right. So you're making, in the end, advice forwards for them to do some more positive works and next steps to make the work better, rather than shutting down the discussion. So even if your first response is to correct things and to be horrified, maybe, at the level of the way in which they've expressed what they've found, best to keep some of the dismay to yourself and to find this sandwich of something positive, an exploration of work that needs to be done, and then a suggestion of what to do next and how you're looking forward to seeing the next work. Because that actually makes it readable and manageable for the student, and it doesn't shut them down. So we put in the middle of the sandwich then is those corrections of misinformation, incorrect facts, etc. Some suggestions about expressing things differently, and perhaps some models and examples of what theorised work or well-expressed work might look like, and suggest that they take those examples through their own development of their own work, because actually the point of feedback is not just to correct mistakes, it's to enable the student to work at a higher, better expressed level through the rest of their work. So sometimes it might be tempting to write all over a 47-page chapter with detail which is about correcting facts and commas, as well as working at a highly theorised level. But I tend to find that if we correct some things in great detail and then tell the student how we've been changing them and what we think they need to do next, that they need to take that level of change throughout the work themselves. Because one of the things feedback isn't is you rewriting or redoing the work for them. It's about enabling them to learn to do it for themselves. So it should encourage ownership and empowerment to take the work forward rather than you just correcting it. So it's tempting to correct everything, but then you're taking over the work. But explaining what you're doing so that they can take over the work, I think, is what feedback's about.